Genesis 30, starting at verse 25. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children, for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages, and I will pay them." Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you, and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?" "What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. But if you will, do this one thing for me. I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go over all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled and spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you have paid me, any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen." "Agreed," said Laban. "Let it be so as you have said." That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a three-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. Jacob, however, took fresh-cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs, so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of the branches. And they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-colored animals, belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals, so they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks, and female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So far, the reading of the word.
Thank you, John. And it really just does keep getting better and better with Jacob, I think. If it's not wives, it's sheep and goats. But before we get to Jacob's crazy plan, what does it mean to live in reliance on God? That's a question that comes up reasonably often, I think, and it's a good question. It's a question that, in a sense, we should be asking, because we should be doing that. We should be living in reliance on God. But I don't think it's so easy to answer that question. Does it simply mean that I pray a lot? I pray when I get up in the morning, pray when I make a decision at work, or whatever. Is that what it looks like to rely on God? Well, probably prayer is going to be a big part of it, but is that it? Jacob Jacob is struggling, as he has for some time now, struggling to live in reliance on God. And so today, as we watch God continue to work with Jacob and teach Jacob and work in Jacob's life, we will see, I hope, what it means, to some degree at least, to live relying on God. Now, we're also going to see, because Jacob is such a good example of this, what it looks like not to rely on God, and no doubt we'll see some of ourselves in that as well. One of the problems for Jacob has been from all the way back since God, since he fooled his father to get Ishmael's blessing, not Ishmael, Esau's blessing. Jacob has been trying to do things himself. He sees God. God came to him in an incredible vision at Bethel, but Jacob seems to think that God is someone to give him what he wants, rather than, as we've seen, God being his true prize. God is shrunk in Jacob's vision from being an awesome God who is his true and wonderful prize to God who should really dance to Jacob's tune. And God needs to teach him that that's not the way things work. And that's what he does here for him, and so we can learn from that. Verse 25, we join in chapter 30. Oh, and I should say to you, we're actually going to be looking this morning at all of chapter 31 as well. We didn't read that. I had mercy on John and didn't get and you and didn't get him to read the extra 55 verses. But I do want to encourage you to go and read that yourself. Make sure that I'm not fibbing to you. But also find all the things that I don't get to cover, because there's just simply too much there, but it sort of all works as one story. Verse 25, we have Jacob. He has now Rachel, who has finally given him a son, as we saw at the end of last time. But he's also got Leah, who's given him, I think, 6 sons, and then the 2 maidservants of those women. So it's effectively 4 wives, 11 sons, at least 1 daughter. And he says to himself, well, I've done my 14 years to pay for my wives. Now it's time to go back to my homeland. And he says to Laban, send me on my way. Laban replies, look, I'd like you to stay because by divination I've discovered that the reason I've been going so well, I have so many flocks, I've become so prosperous and wealthy myself, is because the Lord is blessing me through you. So please stay. You name a price, and I'll pay it. Jacob replies and feels the need to point out how hard he has worked as well. We'll come back to that. He has worked hard. But he concedes that yes, the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. Verse 30. Now, it's important to note that, because it makes what happens next somewhat astounding. They've both just agreed. They both just said, the reason things are going so well is because God has blessed us because of you, Jacob. But what do they then do? Well, both of them get down to scheming. They try and outwit each other, outdo each other. They try and rip the other one off, which is remarkable given that Jacob is the husband of his wives, father of his grandchildren, and this is his father-in-law. Nevertheless, they are trying to rip each other off. And so Jacob proposes a deal. Now, it's a bit tricky because when you read the text, and maybe you noticed that as John was reading it to us, it seems at points kind of contradictory. It's a little bit hard to work out what's going on. I think commentators think, not just me, that the reason it gets confusing is because actually Laban is changing the deal as time goes by, and so things change over time. But here's the deal in basic terms. Jacob says, I'll have all the dark-coloured lambs, all the spotted and speckled lambs, and all the spotted and speckled goats. They are the unusual ones. Most goats are either one solid colour or like sort of two solid colours. It's unusual for them to be spotted and speckled and striped. And so Jacob says, here's how it's going to be. I'll have all the unusual ones, and you'll be able to come and see my flock anytime you want, and you'll be able to tell immediately whether I've taken any of your goats or sheep. And supposedly I'll have fewer because these are the unusual ones. Laban's like, sweet deal, let's do that. And then he gets all the unusual ones, even though Jacob says he's going to have those to start with. He gets all the unusual ones and he gives them to his sons, and they take them 3 days' journey up the road. So already Laban is trying to rip off Jacob. But don't worry, Jacob's got a plan. It's a stupid plan, but it's a plan. Jacob, I don't know what his view on animal husbandry was, but Jacob seems to believe that if he gets branches, and they're dark-coloured branches, we don't kind of immediately know that because we don't know the trees that well, but they're dark, and he strips back the bark in parts so that it exposes the white wood underneath, and so then he has striped branches. And he believes that if he puts the striped branches in the water troughs when the animals are mating, that will somehow produce striped and speckled offspring. Can I do anyone who's in the process of having children, don't go home and paint your room blue. It could turn out badly. Who knows? Who knows? So that's what Jacob does. Now, whatever you might think of it, notice that Jacob is doing the wrong thing. He's being deceptive. It's a stupid plan, but he is nevertheless trying to outwit and outdo and outdeceive Laban. What is perhaps surprising is what we read in verse 43, the last verse John read. In this way, the man, that is Jacob, grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks, female and male slaves, camels and donkeys. How? Well, before we get to that, I mean, Jacob must have thought, mustn't he? This is working. Look how well I'm going. These branches. How come no one's ever thought of this before? And until, as we start into chapter 31, he starts to see, not surprisingly, that Laban and his sons are turning against him. And then God comes to him, verse 2, and says, verse 3, I should say, says, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives. I will be with you. So Jacob calls his wives out into the field. He's being sneaky. That's why he does it that way. And he tells them that they need to go home, and he explains to them why. Now, what's interesting, if you were to read those verses 4 and following, Jacob attributes his success in those verses to God. God has been with me. God has not allowed Laban to harm me, verse 7. God has taken your father's wealth and given it to me, verse 9. Now that's odd at first. You sort of might think, well, why does he think God has done this when he so clearly has been the one scheming and planning himself? Well, you discover why when you read verses 10 to 13. In breeding season, I once had a dream. Now, it's hard to place this chronologically. Where does he have this dream? I would argue that since at the end of this he says, that God says to him, now leave this land at once and go back to your native land, that this is kind of very close in time to all that's happening here. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and I saw that the male goats mating with the flock were speckled, streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. And so Jacob has this vision. And in the vision, God is basically saying to him, I made it as if the males were unusual. It's not that they actually were, because this is a dream. But God is saying it's as if the males mating with the flocks that you're caring for were all spotted and speckled and streaked. And that is why you have been getting spotted and speckled and streaked offspring. It's got nothing to do with your stupid branches, Jacob. It was me. I was doing it the whole time. I was doing it. That's the point of the dream. And that's why when he talks to his wives, he says, God has done this, and God has done this, and God has done this. I wonder how Jacob felt at that point in time. Kind of stupid, I hope. He's just been working his tail off to get these sheep, and he's been carrying out this stupid plan the whole time, and it hasn't been him. It's all been God. Well, friends, can I suggest that we need to come to a realization like that in our lives? Because when we try and control the future, that is, when we try and guarantee ourselves a particular outcome in the future, we are being as foolish as Jacob is being here. It's as though we're hanging out branches and hoping for a different outcome. In fact, if I ever say to you, you're hanging out branches, what I mean is you're trying to control the future. And I'm comparing you to Jacob, which you should be insulted by. But it is. If you are trying to determine the outcome of your actions in the future, particularly if you're trying to do it, as Jacob does here, through deception, a white lie or a little gossip or a little pretending, a little force, a little anger, a little derision to try and control the people around you, other actions to try and guarantee the future that you want. If that's how you think you can control the future, then you are as deluded as Jacob. Now notice something, and this is where we're now thinking about what it means to rely on God. The issue for Jacob is not that he is working hard. Right? You read in verses 38 to 42, he describes how he has been working. Jacob has been, in fact, working very, very hard. Working hard is not necessarily an attempt to control the future. God has made the world a certain way, and we have to operate within the way that God has made the world. So if you have sheep and you want more sheep, you need to look after the sheep that you have. You need to give them water and food. You need to shelter them in storms. You need to protect them from wild animals and so on and so forth. That's hard work. And if you want the sheep to reproduce, then you will need to do that. You can almost guarantee that if you don't do any of that, then you will have a lot of dead sheep. That's just how the world works. The issue is not that we would work hard, that we would work in line with the way that God has made the world. The issue is when we start to believe that when we do that, we guarantee success. The issue is not hard work. That's just how the way the world has been made by God. There's nothing wrong with planning. There's nothing wrong with evaluating. There's nothing wrong with thinking, well, I did it this way and it didn't work very well. I might do it that way next time. All of that is fine. The problem is when we think that we guarantee success. Unless the Lord builds the house, says the psalmist in Psalm 127, the labourers labour in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. Whatever you might do, if the Lord isn't in it, you're doing it in vain because only He can determine the outcome. Do not say, says James, we will go here or there and do business and carry out our plans effectively in that city or this city. No, you say, if the Lord wills. The issue is not the planning or the doing. The issue is assuming that you're in charge. And so living in reliance on God is not to do nothing. It's not constantly to be paralyzed by wondering what he wants you to do. It's to do, but realize that God gives the outcome. It's to do and then to go to sleep at night resting in the fact that whatever God has planned, he will do. He is in control. He decides whether it succeeds or fails. Relying on God means that we say, well, I've done what I can do. This is up to you, God. Now, of course, we also pray for wisdom and guidance and so on, but we leave it up to God. Jacob is not doing that. Jacob thinks that it is up to him and his cunning. Now, I suppose it's kind of obvious, but I think it's worth stating that obviously it's not relying on God if you try and guarantee your future through sin. Let's say that you are a worker and you're at work and you can see a way that the business can be improved. You've got a great plan. And so you go to your boss and you say, look, I really think that we should do this. And because you really want to get it over the line, you kind of oversell it. I mean, they're just little lies, but they don't, and you downplay the costs and the potential difficulties and the fact that no one else has ever been able to make it work before. And then the guy over there has got a different plan where you white ant his ideas because that's no good. Because you think that you've decided how to get it done. And you use deception to get there. Or you want your kids to live, act and believe a certain thing or do a certain thing. And so you just bend the truth. I mean, you hide inconvenient truths and you convince them. And of course it's okay because what you want for them is really very, very good. It's just very easy to use deception to try and get to the place where we want to go. We're aiming at a good thing maybe. But we do not rely on God when we think that we should do it our way instead of his. When we think ourselves wiser than God and that we can achieve good outcomes by doing it our way. That's not how it works. You see, Jacob could have made the same deal. And Laban could have taken all the unusual animals and driven them 3 days down the road. And Jacob could have said, well, God, let's see what you can do here. And just bred the animals and cared for the animals and did what he should have done. No deception, no trying to control the future, just leaving it in God's hands. Continuing to work, but leaving it in God's hands. That's what he should have done. And friends, there will be times in our lives when we can see what we think is a good outcome, but the only path there is through sin. If we continue to obey God, it seems to us that we will never get there. And God says, no, trust me. Rely on me. I can get you wherever I want you to be. Just trust me. Obey me. I don't need your sin to get you where I want you to be. I want you to obey me. That's what it means to rely on God. And remember that as we sleep, having worked, and as we rely on God and trust in his ways, the blessing that he's offering us is not stuff. The true prize is himself. It's God himself. And the real evaluation of whether a particular circumstances or a particular outcome or whatever is a blessing or a curse is not whether it was the thing that you wanted. It's not whether it's really cool, it's wealth or whatever. The question is, did this outcome, did this event help me to draw closer to God or further from God? If it's closer to God, then it's a blessing. If it helps you to love God and love your neighbour more, then he has blessed you. If not, no matter how good the thing is in your eyes, it's not a blessing. The measure of blessing is how does it help you relate to God? And if you see that, again, as we've said before, trusting God, obeying God, even if it looks like it's going to not get you where you want, is always going to be best. But God did prosper Jacob, didn't he? God, for some reason, well, we're kind of told why. I've seen all that Laban has been doing to you. God prospers this crazy branch plan. Well, he doesn't, it's not through the branches, really. The branches were neither here nor there, but he still prospers Jacob. Why? Well, presumably because that was the best way to teach Jacob, to cause Jacob to see that God is his ultimate prize. And he is learning. He's talking about God more here than he does anywhere before this. He attributes his success to God. But Jacob still has more to learn. He still tries to control the situation. God came to him and said, "Leave, go back to your homeland, I will be with you." And what does he do? He meets in the field in secret with his wives. And then he just ups and leaves. We haven't read that, but that's what he does. He ups and leaves without telling Laban. Just packs everything and goes. He obviously is afraid that Laban isn't going to let him go. And so who's going to solve that problem? God could. God said he would. But don't worry, Jacob's got it under control. Jacob flees. Now, we're told, a little footnote, while Laban's out shearing the sheep, Rachel goes into her father's household and steals the household gods just before they leave. So she's carrying them with her. Laban, not surprisingly, gives chase. It seems that he's intent on violence, perhaps. He's taken a lot of men with him. And then in verse 29, we read this. I have the power, this is Laban speaking, I have the power to harm you. But last night, the God of your father said to me, be careful to say nothing to Jacob, either good or bad. Laban, intent on perhaps violence, it seems, from the way he speaks, is stopped by a word from God. Don't touch him. And Laban stops. Jacob thought he needed to flee. God is still looking after him. Now, the story, as it unfolds from here, kind of drives that home in a very interesting way. Laban, the next thing he says after that is, I understand why you want to go home, but why did you take my household gods? And Jacob says, well, we didn't take your household gods. No one here has your household gods. Jacob doesn't know that Rachel's done that. If you find anyone with your household gods, they will not live, says Jacob. All right. But then listen to what happens. Verse 33. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I am having my period." So he searched but could not find the household gods. Now this is supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be funny because you're supposed to envisage Laban, rummaging through all the tents, throwing things out of bags and crates and whatever else and not being able to find his household gods. And then he comes in and there's Rachel demurely sitting on the saddle. "Oh, I couldn't possibly get up. I'm so sorry. I have my period. And he's like, oh. Right? That's supposed to be funny. But that's not the only reason it's supposed to be funny. God protected Jacob with a word. Don't touch him. Don't say anything good or bad. Don't do it. And Laban was restrained. The household gods, they need protecting. They're weak, they're stupid, they're impotent. They can't do anything. Now that's important for the people of Israel because if you read all the way past into Exodus, when they're being taken out of Egypt, these gods are still hanging around. Well, they're not real, but you understand what I mean. The people are still kind of hanging on to these gods, and God has to say to them, get rid of them. And so as they read this, they're supposed to go, these things are stupid. These little statues could be stolen, could be carried around, had to be hidden and protected, where God, the God of the universe, could step in and change the course of offence with a word. And though that was an important lesson for the people of Israel to learn, I think it's important for us to learn as well, because whatever you set above God, whatever you prize above him, cannot protect you or help you. It needs protection. It needs your special care. It needs you to look after it. Whether it's your money or your reputation or your fame or even your relationships or sex or whatever it is, whatever you have put above God as the thing that will make you happy, if you get it, you then are enslaved to it as you try and protect it and care for it and look after it so that no one else will get it. It's weak, it's pathetic, it's stupid. But God's not. He can do whatever he wants. He can protect Jacob. He can bless Jacob. He can give Jacob what he needs. And it seems that Jacob finally gets this. He's still got more to learn, but he finally gets it. What happens after Laban has finished searching for the idols and can't find them? Jacob gives him a right dressing down. It seems like, he's heard that God's in his corner and he's like, right, now I'm going to speak my mind. So he does. And then Laban, he wants to, it sort of reads as though he wants to react. He wants to fight back, but he knows that he better not. And so he says, well, let's make a covenant together. And so they make a covenant. And it's basically an agreement that says, you treat my daughters well, which is a good thing. And then here's a pillar. You stay on that side, I'll stay on this side. We won't cross over into others' territory. I'm on the fun side of the island, you're on the bad side of the island, that sort of thing. So that's the agreement, and they swear an oath. Laban actually swears an oath to all different gods. And then listen to who Jacob swears his oath to. Verse 53. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. That's a strange name for God. You don't find that name for God anywhere except for a few verses before, where Jacob says in his comments to Laban, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed, but God has seen my hardship, the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. The fear of Isaac. That's a strange name for God. But you see, Jacob finally gets who he has been dealing with. This is not a God who you bargain with, as he did at Bethel. Oh, if you look after me, then you can be my God. This isn't a God who you just expect to give you whatever you want. I'll ignore you, God, and you said you were going to bless me, so great, you just blessed me. This is not a God who is small and pathetic and you can manipulate through the actions and get out of him what you want. No, this is the fear of Isaac. This is a God who can stop a dangerous man with a word. This is a God who can give you the sheep that you said you wanted despite genetics and despite all the silly plans that you had. He can do it. He can do whatever he wants. And so Jacob finally realizes who he's dealing with. God has gone from being small to incredible. God has gone from being something you play with to something you must respect and honour and take account of. And friends, we need such a realisation. And can I say, probably like Jacob, we probably need that realisation more than once in our lives. Because we too can treat God as small. We can treat God as someone who we can manipulate and try and get him to do what we want in this world, as though we are in control. But what will God do for us? Will he give us a dream or a vision or something? Well, he may. It's unlikely. Because actually he's given us all we need already. We see God as great, as someone to be feared as well as loved at the cross. Because at the cross, we see the wrath of God poured out against our rebellion and our sin. We see the consequences of rejecting God and having something else as our prize. There is a price that must be paid, and that price is paid by Christ. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of an angry God. The cross demonstrates that, but it also demonstrates his magnificence in that he is willing to walk to that cross himself to take that punishment. If you have the unfortunate situation where there was a person, a child, let's say, who had sinned greatly or done something wrong, and their parents stepped in and said, no, look, I'll take the punishment. And perhaps if it was a really awful time, I'll take the torture and the death in order that my child went free. You would look at that person and you would think, wow, being willing to step forward and be tortured for another person, that's incredible. And yet, in a sense, that's exactly what Jesus does. He steps forward. He was in that garden, blood dripping from his head as sweat. He was that stressed about what was to come, and yet he steps forward and he takes the wrath of God against our sin. That's how great he is. That's how powerful he is, how magnificent he is. And when you see the cross, you ought to not just see the love of God. We see that in spades, obviously, but also the power and the might and the seriousness of God and his justice. That he is not a God to be trifled with or mucked around with. He is not a God to be manipulated and expected to fall in line with our plans. He is a God in control. And he can be trusted with our lives, with our future, because he's a God who rescues us, who dies in our place. And if he's willing to do that, why should I worry about tomorrow? Why do I need to control the future if he's controlling the future? For our God is not small. He's watching over us. He protects Jacob ahead of time, and he steps ahead of time to protect us from the sin that we deserve, the wrath that we deserve because of our sin. He can be trusted with our future. And so we can rely on him. We don't need to do it ourselves, and we certainly don't need to sin to get where we think we need to go. We can leave it up to him. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we confess that so often we think that if we could just decide our own futures, everything would be good. If it could just go our way, the way we think is best. And Lord, we confess that there are times when we sin to try and get there. We try and manipulate you and cajole you and force your hand even, because we think that we know the future that is best. But Lord, we ask that you would shatter our small view of you. Help us to see the folly of those thoughts and rely on you, to entrust ourselves to you, the God who would die and suffer incredibly in our place. Thank you that you are so trustworthy. Thank you that though we are like Jacob, you do not give up on us. But you bring us back to yourself time and time again, and we ask, Lord, that you would continue to help us to see that you are a great and awesome God who can be trusted in every way. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.